Looks like the 10-year anniversary season is finally over. Let's talk about it. Over the course of the past decade or so, we've had mostly really good episodes coming out of Death Battle, as well as some that were less than good, but even despite the flaws, I love this show. Life has never really felt the same since I've started watching, and I mean that in the best way possible, with it giving me something to anticipate every couple weeks, with the payoff being an enjoyable experience more often than not. But as stated at the beginning, Season 8 was given the illustrious title of the 10-year anniversary season. How did it fare with the rest of the series in that regard? Pretty well. I wouldn't say it's as good as Season 6, but it was still a great way to celebrate the show being around for a decade. I'll go more into detail about how I felt about it later down the line, since you clicked on this video to see my ranking of its episodes. Note that I'll be spoiling all the season's verdicts, so watch the episodes if you haven't. There's a playlist linked in the description to do it more conveniently, and then we can see if your thoughts mirror mine. If you have seen the season in its entirety already, know that this is not an objective list, but rather a list where episodes are ranked from my least favorite to favorite. Without further ado, let's get started. To tell the truth, it's been really easy to figure out which episode would go in dead last each time, though sometimes it's an episode I wish I didn't have to put there in the first place. Steven Universe vs. Star Butterfly was a disappointment in so many ways. It wasn't a hype matchup for me, I'll admit that, but it was still a matchup I thought would make for a good episode. And besides, Western animation is underutilized on this show, so when it was announced, I was looking forward to something I'd find enjoyable. Instead, we got something that left a lot to be desired. To start off, Steven's rundown needed better revision, especially since we get his biggest calc dropped before we even hear his name! Hell, it was dropped while we're still talking about a part of the story that happened before he was even born. This could have been saved for the feats section, where big calcs like this belong, but no. It comes out of nowhere in the middle of his backstory, and nothing they talk about for Steven even sounds impressive anymore. On top of that, what's with the end clips? Steven's is the ending of his theme song, but without the backing music, so it just sounds weird, and Stars has her acting way crazier than she normally is. Yeah, the analysis is genuinely flawed, though I did like the joke where Boomstick eats bacon in hopes of getting powers. Nothing hilarious, but it got a chuckle out of me. It's the best joke in the episode. But how is the fight? It felt like a waste of potential if I'm being honest. I'll give credit where it's due though. I like the custom sprites, I like the voice acting for both characters, I like Steven's characterization, I like the appearance of Spider with a top hat. Stars of the Universe is a great backing track and it's a good listen on its own too. On top of that, I can't find anything wrong with the Pink Steven transformation. The hand-drawn stuff is really good and it felt like a natural way for Steven to turn pink. I also like the foreshadowing for the watermelon Stevens coming out, what with Steven spitting out some watermelon seeds at the beginning. Point is, while I think this episode is bad, it has a long ways to go to be considered among the worst in the series. But that doesn't mean there aren't a plethora of things in this animation that I really don't like. Chief among them being that aside from the Pink Steven transformation, it really doesn't feel like anything substantial even happens. Hell, it felt like they did the bare minimum, and this is not helped at all by how early on Star transforms. It felt like the fight was still getting started because we were only a minute into it by this point, and that made things especially jarring. Speaking of jarring, what's with the filter on her voice? It only shows up on her first line after transforming, and it inexplicably disappears afterwards, and that bothers me. Either apply the filter to all her post-transformation lines, or don't apply it at all. There's other moments like it too where the animation really feels like it was unpolished. A few examples being the hand-to-hand segment feeling very clunky at best, and it being easy to tell that Steven isn't actually grabbing the Warnicorn here. Plus, there's a frame of the storyboards that actually made it into the final product, and I find that genuinely funny. I know that last one is a nitpick, but it, along with the other things I mentioned, shows the fight's lack of polish very clearly, which makes the lack of abilities thrown around throughout all the more questionable. And that leads me to the writing. Like I said, they nailed Steven's characterization on the head, nothing wrong with it that I can tell. But Star, on the other hand, even as someone who hasn't seen much of Star Versus, her characterization doesn't feel right. Like, she starts off trying to cheer Steven up, but then she inexplicably wants to kill him later without any rhyme or reason, and then she feels happy about doing so after the fight ends. Yeah, that even sounds poorly written, even without taking characterization into account. Speaking of the death, man, it sucks! If there's a few good things I could say about it, I like how brutal the shot after the death is despite having no blood, and Steven's cracked gem does a good job symbolizing his defeat. As for the killing blow itself, it's a vaporization death that not only looks really similar to one from a previous episode, right down to where it looks like they gave Steven boobs, but combined with how the whole fight felt like a whole lot of nothing, it also made it feel like it ended far too quickly. On top of that, it meant Monster Steven never showed up once in the entire fight, which added some abruptness to it too. Now, I get it. Monster Steven coming out is very context specific, and he has the same abilities as Pink Steven, but with no control. But think about it. There was a good opportunity for him to come out even in the context of the fight itself. The carnage of all the watermelons and warnicorns, anyone? If Steven were still alive to see it, he'd almost certainly think of himself as a monster. That's what triggers the transformation, right? Bada bing, bada boom. And besides, which is more impactful? Vaporizing a human, or vaporizing something the size of God-freaking-Zilla? Seriously, if Monster Steven had appeared, I can almost guarantee that I wouldn't have called the episode bad. Hell, it might have been above the next entry at least. But as it is now, it's something I felt more and more jaded towards as time went on. And quite honestly, it feels like it had been rushed. It's a shame because this matchup had so much potential to be great, but I just can't force myself to like the episode. It's not awful, but it is very easily my pick for worst of the season. So, Steven vs. Star was really the only episode this year that I'd call bad, and I only think of it as just below the threshold for okay, which should be a good indicator of how good the season is. As for this episode, it's a bit of a weird case for me in terms of ranking it. Let me explain. Overall, I found Macho Man vs. Kool-Aid Man to be just okay. As weird as this is for me to say, I liked everything besides the fight as a whole. Hell, if I'm being honest, I'd have this lower than Steven vs. Star if I were just looking at fight animations. It's the same issue where hardly anything noteworthy happens despite how much animation potential there is, except it's worse because the fight only lasts for 2 minutes and there's even less abilities being thrown around. On top of that, there are very noticeable times where the animation cuts corners. There's this odd bit where it goes to split screen for some reason when it's just Randy picking up Kool-Aid Man. But the most notable example of this is when Wiz and Boomstick out of nowhere talk about some of the other abilities these two have in the middle of the fight instead of the proper analysis. Hey, you know what would have been better? Actually seeing the abilities in action. We hear it happening. Why is it off screen? Plus, it also just broke the pacing for no real reason. While the animation quality is good otherwise, there's also the trees Kool-Aid is crashing through being hardly noticeable. Hell, I didn't have much of an idea on what was going on when I first saw it because of how well they blended it with the background. There are a few things I do like, though. Oh Yeah is a good backing track, albeit pretty meh on its own. The voice acting from Anthony Sardina and Tom Schock as Randy and Kool-Aid respectively is very on point. This shot is pretty cool since it's very reminiscent of the creation of Adam, but quite easily the best part is where the fight goes to the Kool-Aid dimension, where the animation style switches to a mock-up of claymation made in Blender. Given that this is the first time Death Battle's even done this style of animation, it's really cool that they were able to pull it off so well, making it a very nice unexpected surprise. If you weren't following Luis on Twitter before the episode came out anyway. And then we get to the death. Oh boy. The concept is pretty neat. It's certainly unique. Yeah, there's no dancing around the subject, is there? Apparently, people are using this to vilify the Death Battle team despite how they treated Randy with nothing but respect and celebrated his legacy in the analysis. And on top of that, there's like no gore in the death whatsoever, nor did they show the mark. Plus, they revive him later and imply that this is the kind of thing him and Kool-Aid Man do every week, which, side note, I found that pretty charming. And just because the blow happened to be at his chest doesn't mean it's a reference to how Randy Poffo himself died. For those who don't know, he died of a heart attack. But here's the thing. If they were really trying to reference that, as tactless as it would have been, his heart would have very clearly exploded. But as it is here, that's not the case. Can we please stop treating Death Battle like they're evil now? Thanks. So anyway, here's why I decided to put this above Steven vs. Star. Everything else. Let's start with the analysis. It looks very different from every other episode in the series, and in a way that I like. It is the 150th episode, and it fits this matchup in particular very well. Plus, the jokes are pretty funny, especially Kool-Aid Man having no respect for walls. Sure, the way we go back to talking about Randy is a bit out of the blue, as is the transition into the fight, which is especially jarring, by the way. But overall, I had a smile while watching the analysis. It's also worth noting that Jocelyn and Dummy had a really good dynamic in the post-analysis. Seriously, I really hope we see more of them in the future since they hardly appear in the series anymore. But now it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. The fact that the plot of this whole episode is Boomstick searching for his dad. So, full disclosure, I never really minded the Boomstick's dad jokes. Sure, they can get a bit excessive, but typically it's just one line I'm going to forget about because of a better joke later down the line. Though seeing as it was a recurring trend, I was naturally looking forward to the closure of these jokes. Overall, I had a good time. Boomstick thinking Randy Savage was his father only because he was wearing red was pretty funny, and then he thought Kool-Aid Man was his father. Sure, why not? And then the tip guy ends up being, oh god damn it, it's Deadpool. Why did it have to be Deadpool? His appearance was whatever, he didn't overstay his welcome, but that introduction makes me want to die. And then we go to a trailer where we see Mama Boomstick. Yeah, Boomstick never really finds his dad, but we do get a nice message. You can't always get what you hope for, but you just might find what you need. The support from his mother ultimately gets Boomstick to finally get over his dad, and it was quite nice. And yeah, since this episode, we haven't gotten a single Boomstick's dad joke. Hopefully it'll stay that way. But as for the episode as a whole, the fight felt like it did the bare minimum, and the video is titled Macho Man vs. Kool-Aid Man. Everyone clicking on the video will come here to see Macho Man fight Kool-Aid Man. The B-plot is nice, but I'd still exchange some of it with more fight. Hell, any budget used on fucking Deadpool could have been used to make the fight more ham. As it is, it's not an oh yeah, but at the same time, not an oh no either. It's an okay. So, the SFM team, now known as the Blender team as of this season, they've done some really amazing stuff in the past, like Ganondorf vs. Dracula, Obi-Wan vs. Kakashi, and some others we'll actually be getting to later in this video. However, give them a matchup that focuses on hand-to-hand choreography, and chances are, it's landing on the third lowest position on my list, because it's happened twice in a row now. Although I'll give Akuma vs. Shao Kahn this, it definitely improved from Batgirl vs. Spider-Gwen enough to the point where it isn't bad, but at the same time, there's still enough holding it back that I can't in good faith call it good either. I'll talk about the things I liked first. The two fighting in a 2D space at the beginning was a good reference to how they're fighting game characters, and the action itself was pretty enjoyable. The shot where Khan sends Akuma tumbling across the desert is cool, as well as this bit of choreography with Shin Akuma, where he does the Tatsumaki Zankukyaku, which turns into Khan trying to break his back. And good lord, the shot of Oni's eyes in the smoke is quite chilling. Easily the best part of the animation in spite of everything I'm going to say about the Oni segment later. On top of that, Satsui no Sekai is really good as a backing track and on its own, and Philip Sacramento's voice acting on Akuma was spectacular. Shao Kahn though, this is where I start talking flaws. I love Gianni Matrigano's other performances on the show, barring Nathan Drake. I love his shit posts, but his Shao Kahn performance is just not great. He doesn't really sound threatening, he doesn't sound intimidating, it's just not Khan. And it's especially off-putting seeing as the analysis had a cutaway joke where we hear some of Khan's iconic voice lines, which had the extra gruffness the voice acting didn't. At least he's gotten 2 other roles this season that were really good. Plus, the animation isn't free of issues either. Akuma's jump here is missing visual effects, so it just looks weird, and the X-ray shots aren't particularly impressive. Like, the first one has a crack you could tell was poorly overlaid, and the second one didn't have any cracks, so what damage was being conveyed here? I'll give credit where it's due. In spite of everything I just said, I thought the fight was decent so far. Then we get to the Oni transformation. I like the concept of Khan sucking away enough of Akuma's humanity that the Satsui no Hado takes over, causing him to turn into Oni. But good god, what is that transition? The Tekken 7 model just flashes when it turns into the Street Fighter 4 model, where Akuma's body proportions are now different and his shirt just pops out of existence. Because that doesn't look like shit! Oni's rushdown isn't much better. There's no hit sparks, so the attacks don't have impact. There's shockwaves, but then those go away too, so it stops looking like Oni's even hitting Khan altogether. The projectile spam was alright though. Come the fuck on, what is this? Is that Khan's reflector shield? Oh my god, I thought we were past this! Thor vs. Wonder Woman just called, it wants its untextured polygonal effects back. The resulting shot was really cool though. But that's actually what the remainder of the fight boils down to for me. Some shots are really cool, but they're surrounded by bad stuff. Like, Oni punching through Khan's torso is cool, but the next shot has this Shoryuken that looks robotic as all hell. And the Raging Demon goes for the Street Fighter V variant, and it's really cool, as is Khan stopping the last punch. But what comes before it is this weird shot where Khan rips something out of himself, and Oni knocking the hammer out of Khan's grasp also looks weird as hell. And the very next shot after the Raging Demon is a close-up of Khan's disgusting helmetless face. And while I really like Khan ripping Oni's arm off and the hammer landing on his face, as well as what they were going for with the kill, there is no time to let it sink in before Khan reels his hammer back to incorrectly say flawless victory. Yeah, this is one of those animations that went from enjoyable but flawed to very flawed with some good parts sprinkled in. It doesn't have it as bad as, say, Amy vs. Ramona, but still. Anyway, how did the analysis fare? It was fine. I liked the aforementioned cutaway gag with Khan's voice clips, mainly because of Boomstick making the constant puns involving Khan's name. The male stripper joke was funny, as was Boomstick mentioning Vor. Sure, why not? But then there's this cutaway gag where Boomstick has a giant can of lube, and I genuinely don't know what to make of this. No, really, even 3 months later, I don't know how I'm supposed to even emote to this. It's especially awkward because Wiz agrees to enter the can, but the joke never gets a conclusion. Not even in the post-analysis. Yeah, I don't know. This episode is there, it exists, and it is certainly not their best. Assuming Season 9 will be another 16-episode season with a mid-season break that will also last for 3 months, please, for the love of God, leave us with a character who isn't a returner. Especially not someone who would be making their 4th goddamn appearance. Man, was the waiting period for Batman vs. Iron Man painful. I'm not joking when I say that I was anticipating what the next time would be more than I was for the actual episode. As for whether the wait was worth it or not, well, I was right about the next time being a more interesting matchup than the 2 episodes it was sandwiched between combined. But the episode itself? I mean, it's certainly decent, but I can't help but feel let down in the end. The analysis was great at least, with some fantastic editing, which is pretty much status quo for comic book episodes, but it makes me happy. The jokes were okay though, but the best one is Wiz going in depth with how Iron Man's lasers work, only for Boomstick to interrupt him and go, "It's a laser!" Chuckles every time, man. Now for the fight. To start, Batman listening to the same J-pop song from his previous episode was something I wasn't expecting. I like it. Something I don't like is, So Death Metal has had sprites on 3D backgrounds since even Season 1, and surprisingly, it looked great each time. But this shot of them walking around in a circle is the one time in the series where I feel that they clash. The sprites look really flat compared to the good-looking Unreal background, and I feel it could have been refined better. The following action is pretty cool, at least with how well choreographed it is. For the most part, anyway. Plus, the hand-drawn shots are really damn good. And hey, the voice acting was great too. Reagan Murdoch did fantastically as Iron Man, even if I thought Chuck Huber was better back in Season 2. Though to be fair, that was a damn high bar to clear. But Gianni Matragrano, oh my god was he spot on as Batman. Seriously, his performance might be up there as one of the best in the series. The fact that most people couldn't tell it was him before the episode came out should be telling of how great he was. It helps that both voice actors had some good material to work with, especially since they got this interaction.
What did you expect? I am Batman. am Iron Man.
Man, what a way to incorporate two iconic lines. Plus, the other lines are very in character for both as well. The same cannot be said for Batman's choreography, though. Bruce whacking Tony with the Watchtower is a really dumb scene. The argument for why he did it is because it was already lost due to it being hacked, but the Justice League has Cyborg, who can unhack it. And that's not even accounting for the other big issue it has. And I mean, holy out-of-character massacre of innocent people, Batman! At least the reference to Batman vs. Spider-Man afterwards was nice. And same with the part where Hellbat makes a bunch of bats to fight against Tony's army of Iron Man suits. Very high energy. Suit Yourself is especially great here as a backing track, even if I think it's only just good in general. And that attention to detail in Iron Man's interface. That, by the way, stays great throughout the entire fight. Seriously, this entire sequence might actually be the best part. And that bust this line at the end? Phenomenal. However, it leads me to something else I don't like. The Godbuster felt really underutilized. It only lasts a minute and it doesn't even get to do much. And it being taken down by a beam which only pierced through several buildings is immersion breaking. Especially since in the analysis, they talked about how it could survive a whole universe exploding. This would come up again in less than a minute where Soul's hammer is stated to destroy a planet with only a 2% charge. In the fight, it only makes a small crater. And it takes out the virtual armor too. And that thing is supposed to be made out of a whole-ass universe! Say what you will about how often Death Battle downplays characters, but here it is very blatant that the animation is doing it, especially with what the analysis told us prior. That aside though, I really like how both characters' arsenals are worn down at the end, so they fight without their high-tech suits. Batman appears to have the edge, even breaking Tony's arm, but it turns out, Tony did have one more suit. The nano armor he apparently slipped into Bruce's bloodstream back on the Watchtower. While it is the 8th incineration kill in the season, it was still a very unique way for Bats to get sent to his parents. And that's happened 3 times now. Overall, this was decent, I guess? But because Beerus vs. Galaxia exists, and we had to wait 2 months for that one, the 3-month wait makes this a disappointment in the end. Enjoyable, sure, but there's so much room for improvement. This is another example of an episode that's flawed, yet still enjoyable. But I'd argue that this is more good than decent. Heihachi Mishima vs. Geese Howard is an episode I don't have any real attachment to, but I found it to be an all-around good watch nonetheless. While there wasn't any one joke in the analysis that stuck out to me as great, they all added up to something I had fun with. That said, the Elon Musk cutaway really overstays its welcome, and I didn't find any of it funny, save for the idea of Heihachi having a Twitter account. That just sounds like it would go terribly wrong and I love it. The fight was enjoyable too. Not necessarily at the beginning though. I like the setup in that it's the final round of a tournament that happens to be a collaboration between the companies these two run. But even the best setups can only get you so far. The hits hardly had any impact since they sounded more like light hits rather than punches, and if I'm being honest, the whole flow felt pretty slow and kinda boring. The energy was still high enough that I wouldn't call it bad, hell I'd pin it as just okay, but still, there's really not much for me to talk about here. And unfortunately, it appears that Akuma vs. Shao Kahn isn't the only episode Season 4 bled into because we got a case of Fire Dragon King Mode syndrome on our hands, where something that's supposed to be impactful happens, but the music sounds so casual that it reduces the impact. Geese using the Raging Storm looked cool, but holy hell was the track terribly low energy for what should have been an intense moment, and on top of that, it's when the volcano breaks apart, and the sound effects for it are barely noticeable. I legit had no idea there was even an establishing shot of the lava bursting out in the first place, because the sound design was just that awful. But you know what? After the Raging Storm is where the fight really gets going. The flow gets way faster, the hits have more impact, the backing track does its job well. Kings of Iron, by the way, is really good on its own, and despite what I said about the Raging Storm segment, it was good as a backing track otherwise. But yeah, the fight genuinely got really good, and I love this 3D shot in particular. The scene afterwards of the two taking a moment to breathe is also nice. Gotta remember that fighters generally have their limits, and these two are no different. Then we get this really cool sequence where Heihachi grabs Geese and throws him into the volcano, and it calls back to both franchises simultaneously. How could you not want more? And the following death? Oh man, it's glorious. Geese tries to save himself, but Heihachi decides that him dying is more important than his own survival, and knocks him into a spire that impales him. How awfully convenient. But holy hell, that animation of Geese melting in the lava is gruesome and I love it. The transition between sprite and close-up is a tad bit jarring, but everything else is too good. And I like how the animation ends with Heihachi punching a drone, ending the broadcast. Oh, but there's a few things I haven't talked about yet, like the voice acting. I really like the direction they went with it, as Yoshi Amawa's Heihachi is speaking entirely in Japanese, and Brett Mukaya's Geese is speaking in broken English. The latter can be a bit hard to understand at times, but regardless, both did fantastically. Helps that the banter is really good too, with the best part obviously being how often Geese says predictable. So often that Heihachi got tired of it after the second time, and I'm glad they had that moment because it would have gotten tiring. And you know what? When they went further with it and had Heihachi saying it, the predictable gag became what I consider to be the best part of the fight. What's that? You expected me to say that? I suppose you could call that. So ultimately, while this episode has its flaws, I still consider this a good episode. It's low because I found the remaining 11 episodes to be less flawed overall. While this show was something I've talked about a lot with him in the past, since late Season 6, this was actually the first episode I saw with my friend Mischief, same guy who came up with the key mashing joke in the Season 7 video. But yeah, since this episode, we watched nearly every episode of Death Battle together, and we plan to do this for Season 9 onwards, along with some other friends who joined us at the number 1 entry. Considering this was the first, though, it genuinely surprised me that I had to put it this low. I mean, yeah, sure, Shadow vs. Ryuko is definitely flawed, as I'll get into later. In fact, they're why I decided to put it here. But it still has a lot of sentimental value to me, on top of being a genuinely good episode. The analysis was something I enjoyed. Sure, the cutaways had jokes I didn't get. Hell, I'm not sure I liked many of the jokes in general. But why I enjoyed it is because I liked hearing them talk about the characters. For Shadow's side of things, yeah, they throw potshots at him, but as a whole, they talked about him in a way that showed respect to his character. It's clear that they learned their lesson from Mewtwo vs. Shadow. On top of that, it also seems like their research has improved from the Mario vs. Sonic remake since they actually gave Super Shadow stats and put him at light speed. Makes me wonder how that fight would go if it happened now, but I digress. For Ryuko's rundown, it was just that I enjoyed hearing Wiz and Boomstick talk about Kill la Kill, a show that I had gotten into just a couple months prior to this episode's airing. That's all there is to it, actually. This isn't among the best analyses in the series, but it's one I got some personal enjoyment out of nonetheless. Let's move on to the fight animation now, and man, it's good! All throughout, it was very fun thanks to how fast and exciting it felt. Seriously, you could tell this was gonna be good when there's a freaking tornado in the sneak peek. Plus, the hand-drawn shots do a very good job replicating the studio trigger feel, especially the transformation. It may be pretty choppy here and there, since the animator himself came out and said that it was made on short notice, but it was still pretty good. And the sound design feels very reminiscent of Kill la Kill at points, even if it fell kind of flat in this sequence here. But otherwise, I like it. Another reason why I like the fight is the track, Chaos Unraveled. I fucking love how it sounds, with it being reminiscent of a Crush 40 song, while also having some elements of a techno rock song, which adds the Kill la Kill feel to it too. The lyrics sound edgy at points, but I don't care. It's a goddamn bop and you can't tell me otherwise. The voice acting is really good as well, with Jello Apocalypse, Jenny Yokobari, and Tom Laughlin sounding really good and very fitting for Shadow, Ryuko, and Senketsu respectively. The material they have to work with? Well, I did like Ryuko taunting Shadow and the Sayonara, which is a callback to Shadow's previous episodes, but then there's Ryuko's general characterization. Mainly her treatment of Senketsu, which is not good. While early series Ryuko was a dick to Senketsu, she eventually saw him as a friend not that much later, so when she gets irritated at him, it feels off, and it genuinely bothers me. Really, the general idea of how Ryuko's character is presented in the fight is why I don't like this episode as much as I did when it first aired. But it would be lower if the action wasn't as fun as it was! There was the tornado from earlier, but there's also the use of the chaos control, the bit in the floating rocks, however they got there, probably from the road. The two spinning into a clash, man, they put in some really cool stuff. Oh, and there's also Shadow pulling out a gun at Ryuko, only for it to not even be loaded, so he throws it away. I don't know why. I've always found it to be pretty damn funny. Going further into the fight itself, I like the transformations for both. Shadow's is simple, not hard to mess up at all, and while Ryuko's was good, it's weird that it wasn't hand-drawn. Going back to the animator's comment, he was also supposed to make a hand-drawn segment for this transformation as well, but again, there wasn't enough time. Still, for what it was in sprites, it was pretty good. Moving on to the ending of the fight, holy hell does it start very well with alumni mode coming out. The Shadow of the Giant Scissors and the establishing shot afterwards, really cool, and same with Shadow flat out breaking the oversized faster than Big Bang arm cutter. Sending Ryuko back down to Earth afterwards while Senket screams her name in worry, and following it up with a Chaos Blast, seems like a very satisfying ending, especially since it's Shadow's first win after 2 Ls, and to an extent it is, but man does Shadow saying Chaos Blast so casually kinda ruin it, especially since, once again, back to the animator comment, there was a take where he was actually yelling. Aside from that, I did like the kill, though the death metal team seems to have thought the death was so good that they would do it again 5 episodes later. But anyway, really good yet kind of flawed is something that describes this episode to a T. Granted, it's higher than Heihachi vs. Geese because the actual fighting is so much better in comparison that Ryuko's bad characterization almost didn't matter much in the end. I say almost because it did prevent this episode from getting any higher in the grand scheme of things. Sentimental value can only get an episode so far, it seems. But hey, it'll be something I'll fondly look back on in the future. It's about damn time we got an animated film character on the show, and they introduced the medium in a pretty good way, all things considered. While I wouldn't call Iron Fist vs. Poe a great episode, it's pretty damn close to it. The analysis, again, has great editing and great jokes. Hell, it's just fun in general. Although I've never really gotten into the Kung Fu Panda films, there's a certain novelty to hearing them talk about Poe since, again, he is the first animated film character to appear on the show. I feel like I'm gonna say animated film a lot in this segment. Should I use synonyms? Yeah, I think I'll use synonyms. Anyway, the fight's pretty good too. The characterization for both is pretty spot on, which makes for some great interactions. Like the setup being a sparring match and the bit with the whooshy finger hold. What helps with it is the phenomenal performances from Jonathan Bullock as Iron Fist, and especially Austin Lee Matthews as Poe. Seriously, that man made us all think Poe was being voiced by Jack Black himself. Something else I like is that there are some set pieces that felt like they came straight out of an energetic cinema. What comes to mind in that category is Poe falling down the stairs, as well as the scene afterwards where Poe is holding onto some bamboo shoots while they're bending towards some smaller shoots. It gives off the feel I'd want for an episode with an, vitalized moving picture character. As for the action itself, it's good. Their abilities are represented well, but it feels like there's something missing from the sparring match and the bamboo fight. Like, both segments are missing an extra punch that other fights had that pushed them to greatness, or even beyond that. That's not to say I wasn't enjoying it, because I was. It's just that the show's done better. I did think Dragons and Dumplings did a great job as a backing track, though on its own, it's not that great. It's very easily the season's Devil of the Night. If there is anything that was an essential piece of how this episode got this high in the first place, it's definitely the Spirit Realm segment. First off, man, it's beautiful! The golden atmosphere, the floating islands, man, it's breathtaking. The action gets that extra punch it was missing previously too, especially when the dragons come out. Seriously, the dragon fight is really well done, and it feels awesome to watch. The hand-drawn stuff is a bit choppy in motion, but the positives outweigh it by a lot. There is one issue I have with it though, and that's the death. Like, okay, Poe's dragon eats Danny's dragon and then Danny himself. That I'm fine with. But then Danny goes in for a punch while he disintegrates? And then he's back in the very next shot so Poe can punch him into dust? I don't know. It felt kinda underwhelming. Poe returning to the real world to then confess his crimes is also kinda whack. Man, you had a great thing going for you, then you blew it. Still, ending aside, the characterization is the other major player for why this is up here. If the action was more engaging outside the Spirit Realm though, I could see this getting higher than the next entry at least. Still, the episode was good, even if it was a bit shy of reaching greatness. Perhaps we'll get some better luck the next time we see a character from hold on, I have to find more synonyms. I got it! Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed Talkie. I want to talk about stomps. When a matchup is a stomp, it means that one character is going to win far more often than the other, and sometimes the stat gap is big enough that the losing character straight up has no win condition at all. This can make some episodes seem uninteresting, as the winner is usually incredibly obvious in these situations. But I like to make the argument that an episode can still be good if the analysis and fight animation are entertaining to watch, despite knowing who will be declared the winner in the end, even if there is such a thing as too predictable, which this episode definitely falls under. And yeah, guys, please, stop saying that a fight was close and then turn around to show how it wasn't! Either talk about how a fight was close, or don't say it's close at all. It's that simple, guys! Even despite all that, Korra vs. Storm is still pretty great. While the analysis is certainly flawed, I mean, they dropped Korra's biggest calc in the preview and thought we were supposed to be impressed by a lower calc later on, as well as the fact that they failed to make this matchup seem close at all, everything else was still pretty fun. Save for the beak joke, all their attempts at humor worked for me. The narrator at the start of Korra's rundown gave me a smile, Boomstick saying queen shit was quite fun, both cutaway gags were funny as hell. I was enjoying myself with this episode's analysis. Same with the fight animation. An underrated aspect of matchups that I don't think most people think of is animation potential, and this one certainly had it, and it delivered. Seeing as both can control the elements, it makes their power sets nice to see bouncing off each other, and on top of that, the effects are just beautiful to look at. The tornadoes especially are gorgeous, which makes the part that takes place inside it especially enjoyable. Besides the effects, the animation quality is really damn good too, and I especially like how smoothly Korra's animated. I like the voice acting here too. While Amanda Julina Gonzalez sounded a bit off at first, she got a lot better once Korra acknowledges how many elements Storm is bending. Nice bit of dialogue, by the way. And I'd say she did a great job overall. Same for Shara Kirby as Storm, since she sounded really fitting for her, and the deliveries are very well done. This includes the scene in the spirit world, where we see her getting overwhelmed. Speaking of, I really like all the different cameos we see in the Fog of Lost Spirits, as most of them are characters who had previously lost their fights on the show, and why not put a well-known reviewer in the community in here as well? It's really fun to come back to this scene every now and then to find some Easter eggs you might not have gotten on your first viewing. It also happens to be when the fight gets so damn good, as the following shot is another tornado, which then has the Cabbage Merchant making another appearance, which didn't feel forced, this cool hand-drawn shot, and Korra going into her avatar state. And Weather the Elements does an especially fantastic job as a backing track here. It's really good at its job in general, by the way, even if there is one bit where it could have done better, but I'll get to that later. It's good to listen to on its own as well, but I'm getting off track here. I like the stuff at the iceberg, but everything in the spirit world is just great. It looks beautiful for starters, but since it's where Korra went into the avatar state as I said earlier, you can bet things are gonna get more intense. A few cases of this being that Korra is able to overpower Storm somehow, and even attempts to crush her with two giant rocks at some point. Of course, this allows Storm to go even more all out, as when she gets pushed out of the spirit world, she comes back in with a huge flood of water. Oh, and need I mention just how stunning the split sea looks? All the other effects are nice as I've stated earlier, but holy shit, the split sea might be my favorite one. Going back to how intense the fight gets, man I love the sequence where Rava awakens within Korra, as well as the string of hits she then unleashes on Storm. You can feel every attack she's dishing out. After trapping Storm in a bunch of rocks, it somehow looks like she might be able to take the win, but Storm was able to prove otherwise by stopping all of Korra's attempts at killing her, breaking out of the rocks afterwards, and I think she's generating a lightning storm inside Korra's head here? I don't know. It's not too terribly obvious what's going on, but I like the killing blow nonetheless, mainly because it has a ton of impact, and that death scream. Holy shit, is it good! On top of that, I really like the line Storm says afterwards, where she acknowledges that Korra fought to the best of her abilities. It's always nice when a character gives credit to their fallen opponent where it's due. The ending has a few issues though. There's no sound effect for Storm breaking out of the rocks, and the visual effect goes by way too quickly, so you could understandably be mistaken for thinking they straight up popped out of existence. And remember when I said the backing track leaves a lot to be desired at some point? Yeah, it's right here. It doesn't have the right amount of energy I'd want for a scene as intense as this, and it doesn't really sound, I don't know, grand? It does the job sounding like an ending of the death battle track, I guess, but it could have been way better here. It didn't drag the killing blow down enough that I can't say I liked it though. It wasn't Fire Dragon King Mode syndrome. Oh boy, did they surprise me with how good this episode ended up being? Hell, I'd go as far as to say it was great. The matchup was, admittedly, so obvious it was painful, but let it not be said that it wasn't an entertaining stomp. Being a fan of the show, there's obviously going to be episodes I find myself really hyped for. Some of these end up exceeding expectations upon airing, while others end up disappointing me. And then there's this episode, which didn't end up being a favorite of mine like I had hoped, but it still became something I am really happy with, so I can't really say I'm disappointed with the end result. Although something I will say about Blake vs. Mikasa is when it first came out, I thought it was good, but I had the same few issues nearly everyone brings up. Those being the fart joke in the analysis, which is still awful by the way, and the characters being animated on 2s looking a bit choppy. But upon several rewatches, the 2s-in-1 style in the fight didn't bother me anywhere near as much as it did on my first viewing, and it, as well as the episode as a whole, ended up growing on me. In fact, the analysis had some real good jokes in it. Fart joke aside, the Wiz clone joke was executed in a way that I found funny, Boomstick saying that hardly anyone in Mikasa's life is able to last longer than a 25-minute episode gets a chuckle out of me every time. Mikasa being the avatar of Titan murder is an analogy I've always found interesting, and the pot shots thrown at Adam gave me and my friends some lovely ammo to throw at him as well. Seriously, he's either Ginger Kylo Ren, or he's Bootleg Virgil. Change my mind. Then we get to the fight animation. Being the only 3D episode this season to be animated by the in-house team, it's very easily the best looking one. Seriously, the graphics in Unreal are nothing short of amazing. A shame we only got one of these this year though, but perhaps we'll get more in Season 9, but I digress. Anyway, the actual animation is great! Thunder Shroud made for a great backing track since, if I'm being honest, it's one of my favorite original tracks in the show because it not only sounds awesome, but it was able to replicate the feel of Ruby and Attack on Titan flawlessly. Plus, it complements the action very well, as it is equally as exhilarating given that both characters are swinging all over the place. Seeing their abilities clashing was really fun too, and Levi's move especially was a nice surprise. I like the part it follows up too, where Mikasa catches on to Blake's strategy of popping clones and attacking from behind, and then prepares for it by not letting her get the jump on her, which leads to a fight where they see each other from an upside down perspective, which was really cool. Though, speaking of dialogue, there's not much of it. Not that I really take issue with it, but it's just something the fight feels like it's missing, though I did like Francesca Kahlo's performance as Mikasa. While Aaron Zek is credited to have voiced Blake here, it's pretty clear to me that all her voice clips were reused from Ruby. I did think what was used was fitting for the context they were used in though, save for the incoming line at the end. Hey, speaking of the ending, it's really good otherwise. Did you notice that Mikasa finds 3 Thunder Spears lying on the ground, and after picking them up, she uses exactly 3 Thunder Spears? Yeah, that's some pretty good attention to detail. On top of that, what exactly goes on is great too. Mikasa once again proves that Blake can't get the jump on her by attacking from behind anymore, by throwing her second Thunder Spear, which depletes Blake's aura completely. This allows her to cut Blake's arm off, and holy fuck, I was not expecting that! Honestly, it succeeds in being a neat little reference to a certain scene in Ruby Volume 3, as well as being a genuinely hype moment. Not sure why Blake's blood is lavender though, I guess it's for stylistic reasons. Oh, but then we get an awesome concept for the death, with an equally awesome execution. Mikasa circles back to Blake to use her last Thunder Spear, but Blake shoots her with Ice Dust, which not only causes her to miss completely, but also has her spinning out of control. Blake then uses her weapon to rebound the Thunder Spear back at Mikasa, which impales her. Why is she not bleeding? What is it with this show's Ruby episodes as of late and not having any blood? Ah, forget it. Back on topic. Blake then pulls the pin on the spear, which causes it to explode and oh my god, that is a haunting death scream. Like, Mikasa sounded like she was in genuine fucking pain here. Good lord! On top of that, the piece of her scarf falling in front of Blake does a damn good job selling her defeat. And you know what? This was a damn good episode. I wouldn't call it amazing, but it's still an episode I love nonetheless. Now let's hope Ruby vs. Maka will blow this out of the water when it eventually happens. Would you look at that? Another episode with a really obvious verdict that turned out to be way better than I thought it would be. So yeah, Lex Luthor vs. Dr. Doom. It should have been obvious who was going to win just based on the fact that Lex had previously lost to Iron Man and that Doom is on par with him, if not stronger. I'll give the analysis credit though, it did a much better job at making the matchup seem close than Korra vs. Storm ever could. Hell, it had me question what I already knew about these characters, as well as whether or not Iron Man vs. Lex was even accurate anymore. Well, until Batman vs. Iron Man happened, and oh god, is it actually still accurate! More than ever, in fact, but here I am digressing again. In terms of entertainment value, holy hell does the editing deliver on that. Nearly every comic book panel feels like it's been brought to life, either with some visual effects or sound effects, sometimes both. Legit, this might actually be the best edited analysis in the entire series. The jokes were good at their job too. The cutaway gag with Boomstick turning 2D is beautifully cursed, and hey, it got a subtle nod in the post-analysis. Although the mind-switching gag has the voices swap along with the minds, that doesn't make it any less funny to see them not used to each other's bodies at all. Oh, and who could forget green boot stompers? Gotta love when they acknowledge a previous episode's controversy. Moving on to the fight animation, and holy crap, the background is gorgeous! I think now's a good time to talk about the fact that the 2D team started using the Unreal Engine for the backgrounds this season. Shadow vs. Ryuko may have been the first episode to do this, but this is where it truly started to shine. They're super detailed and pure eye candy every time. I swear, I know I say this a lot, but Unreal never fails to please in the visuals department. The actual fight also did its job well, in that it proved me wrong about its animation potential. It was damn good here, and it shows. Both characters use a variety of abilities, and the effects on all of them are as pretty to look at as the background is. Plus, there's some especially fun moments in the choreography. Seriously, who could forget Dr. Doom's famous foot dive combo? On top of that, the time shift bomb also made for a really cool scene. Apex of Doom might not be something I can get into on its own, but it's damn good as a backing track. It especially does great after Doom absorbs all the power from the Mother Box and turns the tables on Lex. Speaking of, I love Gianni's delivery of a Superman, referencing who the Everyman Project was supposed to make him like, and it's just a great line in general. Further talking about the voice acting, Lex was really great altogether. I'd actually argue that the voice provided was more fitting for him here than in his fight with Iron Man. Doom also sounded great, by the way. I'm convinced that you really can't go wrong with Stephen Kelly if given the correct role. Back on track though, this shot is freaking awesome. It's a reference to both of Superman's super moves from both Injustice games, and it looks so dynamic and I'm living for it. It's not one-to-one, but it's still awesome. Speaking of awesome, let's talk about that death. Doom swaps minds with Lex and then has him punch himself through the chest to grab his own heart before switching minds again. Holy shit, that must be painful. No wonder his nose sounded as visceral as it did. And if you hadn't noticed, his hand stays in that position for the rest of the animation. Now, instead of simply handing Lex the L afterwards like a normal person, Doom instead pins him to the L, and cuts him into several different pieces while also doing the same to LexCorp behind him. How come Lex always gets to have some of the best deaths in the series? And that thing Doom says afterwards, I swear that might actually be the most in-character thing I've ever heard him say. Oh yeah, I haven't talked about the characterization yet. Both have massive egos and love to hear themselves talk, and it's definitely done very well here. The big interactions only happen when the fight's already slowing down, so it doesn't disrupt the pacing, and they're not as plentiful or as long as everyone makes them out to be, if I'm being honest. I'd say they found the perfect balance to make their banter as entertaining as possible, and it worked! As did this episode as a whole. I was not expecting this to be very high, but oh man did it prove me otherwise. What is it with this season and making episodes I didn't care for conceptually actually awesome most of the time? Not that I'm complaining, I like being proven wrong like this. However, I wouldn't put this any higher just for the sole reason of me preferring the remaining 6 episodes more. Anyway, speaking of things exceeding expectations... Holy shit, it's been a long time since I've been able to put a premiere this high. It's almost refreshing because the last few... Let's go over them briefly. Lara Croft vs. Nathan Drake. Had some good ideas and some not good ideas, and an overall downgrade in animation quality, all leading to the final product being... Black Panther vs. Batman. Dull, boring, forgettable. And Black Panther could have fought literally anyone else if he had to be in Season 5's premiere. Aquaman vs. Namor. The only good episode of this quartet since it was actually entertaining throughout, but it also lacked a punch that prevented it from being even more so. Miles Morales vs. Static. Almost the exact same story as Black Panther vs. Batman. Really forgettable, and thinking about it puts me to sleep. The point I'm trying to make is, none of those episodes were really worthy of being premieres. Even the one good episode wasn't a particularly strong opener. So with 4 premieres in a row that left me wishing they had more, what reason did I have to expect this episode to break that trend? Sure, it was confirmed early on that the SFM team was behind it, but not that long ago, they had proven with Batgirl vs. Spider-Gwen that even they can put out disappointing products. Yeah, it's an interesting matchup, but that doesn't make it immune to bad execution. But it was still intriguing to me, so I was cautiously optimistic going into it. And you know what? It not only paid off, but it blew my expectations right out of the water. If it wasn't obvious already, I think Yoda vs. King Mickey is very easily the best premiere we've gotten since Dante vs. Bayonetta. Sure, it doesn't even compare to that episode, nor do I think this is better than He-Man vs. Lion-O, but I'd be damned if it wasn't great in its own ways. First things first, the analysis. Had some good jokes, with the best one being Boomstick starting off Yoda's rundown by using his speech pattern. Gets me every time, the ending of the joke does. Also, there's some interesting exposition to the whole Boomstick's dad arc here. Sure, why not? Though hey, it made the B-plot of Macho Man vs. Kool-Aid Man not feel like it came out of nowhere to the casual viewer. Assuming they didn't skip the analysis anyway. Easily the best part of the rundown, though, is that there's no mean-spirited joke about how Disney owned Star Wars. Hallelujah, those jokes were getting old. Though the comment section would disagree with me, unfortunately. Anyway, moving on to the fight animation. And like most episodes, it's where this one truly shines. Sometimes literally in this case. Yeah, the effects on Mickey's attacks are especially beautiful, as is the sound design for them too. Yoda's overall sound design is great too, but there's something about Mickey's arsenal that just sounds very pleasant. Helps that he uses a good chunk of it. Speaking of things that sound amazing, Hearts of Light sounds like a collaborative effort between John Williams and Yoko Shimomura themselves. Fairwolf proved that their styles of composing would go very well together if they actually did a collab. Plus, it makes for a great backing track for the fight, and speaking of, the overall action is damn good. The clashing of lightsaber and Keyblade is really cool to watch, and the shots of the camera tracking Yoda's lightsaber are especially awesome. And damn, that banter is good! Both are complementing each other throughout most of the fight, and clearly respect each other as fighters, which was awesome, even if I think I enjoyed Might Might's similar dynamic more, if only because it was a much longer fight, so what was there felt more complete than in a 3-minute long animation. Still though, this fight had some damn good character moments. At some point, Yoda realizes that he's not going to win using his lightsaber, so he willingly throws it away to fight using exclusively the Force. It's when the fight gets really good, by the way, save for a weird moment where Yoda just destroys his only method of leaving the arena. Okay. Everything around it is still great, including the part where Yoda uses Force illusions to make it look like he cloned himself, and it made for a fantastic Kingdom Hearts reference too. On top of that, I love how they worked in the iconic "do or do not, there is no try" line. Yoda tells Mickey that he doesn't have the Force, which he realizes is true as seen in his expressions, but he says he can try though, because all he needs is the light. Yoda then replies exactly how you'd think. Oh, and did I mention the voice acting is fantastic? Philip Sacramento was amazing as Yoda, and Keston Howard pulled off the astronomical feat of sounding just like Mickey Mouse without sounding off. Hell, sometimes I think he did too well because the silly voice often associated with Mickey makes some of the moments feel less tense. But that isn't a real fault since it's not something anyone could really help. It's how Mickey normally sounds, so of course the Ultima scream wasn't going to sound super intense. But even disregarding that, I found the death kinda lame if I'm being honest. I mean, yeah, the brief shot of Yoda accepting defeat was cool, but man, I can't help but feel underwhelmed by the explosion. Yeah, it looks pretty, but it doesn't sound or even look impactful. What happens afterwards does almost make me forget about it, though. The lightning bolt makes us think for a brief moment that Yoda survived, but no, he was just messing around as a Force ghost. He even laughs when fading away, which is what really made me love his appearance as a Force ghost. Man, this entire episode just gives me nothing but wholesome vibes, and that's why I love it so much. Now here's hoping that Season 9's premiere will make season openers being amazing a trend. Yoda vs. King Mickey might not have been able to become my new favorite season premiere by a long shot, though to be fair, nothing's clearing that bar. But Link vs. Cloud 2021 is very easily what I consider to be the best remake they've ever done, and it's not particularly close. If you couldn't tell by using process of elimination, it's also my favorite episode of the season's first half. The analysis was pretty fun, with some fun jokes, and the cutaways were especially great, with the one in Cloud's rundown being my favorite. Just Boomstick outing Wiz and his student loans only for Wiz to freeze him in time and change the subject? That's just golden. Although the same rundown has it starting with the Materia tab and Cloud's biggest calc, all before his background tab shows up. There are ways to talk about Cloud's backstory that doesn't fuck with the pacing, you know. But I sometimes forget about that because goddamn the editing is fantastic, with Nick Kramer able to put images into a cutscene and have them all flow naturally as if they were actually a part of it being the best example. Of all the video game themed episodes, this has the best edited analysis, bar none. And man, the fight is just as good, if not better. I love how it starts with the Final Fantasy VII interface, and the motorcycle fight afterwards is awesome. I don't like how untextured the materia effects in that blue sphere explosion are. Like, seriously, Season 4 was 4 years ago at this point, we should be past this by now. But those aren't big takeaways at all when everything surrounding them is amazing. Cloud falling down cliffs was really funny, even if it lasts a little long for my liking. Link destroying the pottery is even better, especially when Cloud tries to save the pottery. And now that the motorcycles are gone, we get a proper sword fight, and it's fantastic, save for one weird cut. Actually, proper might not be a good word to describe this as a sword fight, since there's different magic abilities being thrown around, like how we get a moment where the two stop time. Wiz and Boomstick always talk about how two abilities that mess with time in the same way would cancel each other out, so the fact that we actually get to see that in a fight animation was really damn cool. What's also nice to see is just how many Zelda games had abilities in this fight. Obviously, we have Breath of the Wild here, but we also have Four Swords, A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, Skyward Sword, and Majora's Mask, and all of them are used so well. Four Swords is obviously when Link uses the Four Sword to make four of himself. How many times did I say four just now? It's a huge highlight of the fight for me, mainly because of the teamwork shown here, as well as Cloud taking advantage of the fact that he's now using the Fusion Sword. It starts off with some good sword swinging, but then Purple Link turns into the fairy Boomstick always thought he was back in Season 1 to distract and annoy Cloud. Red Link makes a bunch of bombs to use against Cloud. Green Link shoots an ice arrow to freeze Cloud, which doesn't work, but still gave Blue Link the opening to knock him into the bombs. Man, what a cool sequence. But the Four Swords can't last forever, so Cloud makes a black hole to get rid of the Four Sword and all the links that aren't blue. We then get the references to the other games I mentioned. A Link to the Past is the magic cape Link uses to turn invisible and grab the Master Sword that was previously disarmed, as well as use the ocarina to play the Song of Storms. No relation, and you can guess where that's from. The song also happens to appear in the backing track, Final Breath, which is fantastic to listen both here and on its own. Skyward Sword is, obviously, the Skyward Strike, which Cloud ultimately uses for himself to kill Link. No, like, really, Link actually dies here, as implied by the fact that we hear Mipha's Grace being used to revive him. And when she does, this silhouette of fierce deity Link, the Majora's Mask reference by the way, is fucking amazing, as is that badass dodge from Cloud. That's another highlight from the fight, as well as their brief scuffle. It ends with Cloud using the Omnislash version 5, complete with the return of the interface and the old school sound effects. And man does it look awesome! Especially that moonshot, god damn. Cloud's battle cry as he slices Link in half was also fantastic. Seriously, Adam Gibbs was all in all the perfect choice for Cloud, and that scream really hits it home. He also sounds like a really good mix between Steve Burton and Cody Christian. If there is one thing I don't care for in the death, it's that Link's two halves disappear to reference Final Fantasy VII, which is all fine and good, but then his two halves fall down. Guys, you can't have both. Otherwise it's just weird. Still, the death was awesome, as well as the rest of the fight. It has some issues that kept it from getting any higher, but it is still a great example of what a good mid-season finale looks like. It's also way better than the original 2012 version. I still get some enjoyment out of it, albeit most of it is ironic, but I would not put it in my top 5 for Season 1 anymore. Seriously, if there's any list I'm glad aged like milk, it's the one that wasn't even the main focus of the video it's in. Perhaps I'll rectify it in a future video. The remaining entries on this list are what I believe to be nothing short of masterpieces, and the shining examples of why I love this season so much. Quite frankly, they're all deserving of being number 1, but I'll talk about why there is really only one answer for me later. For now, I want to talk about Goku Black vs. Reverse Flash. I already thought it was awesome when it first came out, but over time it just got better and better, with the only thing really holding it back being a few things in Goku Black's rundown. Those being that burping and farting joke, which is just groan-worthy, and the fact that they drop his biggest calc before we even hear the name Goku Black. Everything else is great though. The other jokes landed for me, and Reverse Flash's rundown is among the best in the season if you ask me. On top of the jokes being even better than the ones in Zamasu's rundown, the editing is phenomenal, and it covers everything it needed to in a way that felt natural, something I'm only saying because of the way they structured Black's rundown at the beginning. It was an overall fun experience nonetheless, and you know, I'd say this episode is a case similar to Ghost Rider vs. Lobo, where the only thing really wrong with it is something in the analysis, which means the fight animation is gonna be amazing, and oh boy, it certainly is! The action has so many things I found memorable, and in all the best ways. The part where Black goes Super Saiyan Rose and hits Thawne through the Earth and the Moon just to rebound him back to the exact location was freaking awesome. And the Kamehameha scream afterwards might just be the best one the series has to offer right now. Seriously, Michael Kovac was amazing as Goku Black, holy shit. And I'll talk about Thawne's voice acting later. Back on topic though, the negative Speed Force was also really cool, even if I preferred how the normal Speed Force looked in Wally vs. Sonic, but it's still awesome. As is the hand-drawn shots, and the clone fight afterwards. Oh, and the part where they start killing each other in earlier parts of the fight. Seriously, that might just be chaos incarnate. Also, we get a reference to Flash vs. Quicksilver, where Thawne puts a statue in place for Quicksilver to get killed by it, with a flawless recreation of his death and everything. Going into this episode, I was not expecting it to rectify a previous death, and while I still don't exactly care for it, or the actual episode it was in for that matter, I still love the reference nonetheless. And what makes everything I talked about so far come together is two things. First, the backing track. Reverse Rosé's overall tone and the lyrics especially give it a villainous vibe that I absolutely adore, and it complements this fight spectacularly, on top of being a really good listen on its own. It's my third favorite track from the season, by the way. Second, Reverse Flash's characterization. While Goku Black was done justice here, every one of his lines and actions, especially the Massacre of Mortals at the beginning, all felt in character for him. It's his opponent who made this episode get as high as it did. In terms of how in character he is, sure, Thawne was only equally as well done as his opponent, but what makes him the highlight of the whole thing is who he is, a petty asshole. Like, when he went to attack Goku Black, quote-unquote, it wasn't because he was committing genocide, it was because he interrupted his monologue. And it wasn't even Black he was aiming for, it was his teacup. And he went for that just to piss him off. You can hear it in the way he says, oops. Another shining example of his character is when he used a civilian as a meat shield. Thing is, he didn't even need to do that since he can phase through any and all of Black's attacks. He did it because he could, and he is that petty, and I'm here living for it. And really, that's how he's like in the entire fight. He knows Zamasu can't kill him, so he just messes with him as much as possible. But I don't think he knew that he couldn't die by conventional means either, which is why this hilarious bit exists, where they both go back to the beginning of the fight and kill each other, and it doesn't work for either of them, so they both yell, "Why aren't you dead?" And by the way, Thawne is voiced by Beautiful Valentine, who is the guy who invented the It Was Me Berry copy pasta, and he proves that there was no better choice for the role than him. Seriously, the voice acting in this episode as a whole was nothing short of phenomenal. And you know what the best part of the fight for me is? The death.
Sorry, was that important?
How fun.
Do I even need to say anything here? No, really, what can I add to it that's of any substance? The shit-eating grin Thawne makes after breaking the time ring? The fact that he flips off Zamasu before presumably going a few seconds back in time to impale him, and then he runs around the earth over and over again while scraping Black's body while he just lets out such a visceral scream that's not just in agony, but in hatred, seeing as he's about to get killed by someone who's just a mortal by definition. Oh, and when we get a good look at what remains of him after that, we can see the Super Saiyan hair, implying he's still alive at this point. But you can bet he's dead after that wind-up throw, sending him into the sun, which causes it to explode and destroy the planet. This is my favorite death in the season, by quite a huge margin. I can't sing this episode's praises enough. It's so good. The fact that it's only at number 4 just proves how much competition there was this season. I wonder if I need help for enjoying this as much as I did, though. When this was announced as the season finale, I was intrigued. It was a matchup with an obvious verdict, sure, but I was interested in how the episode itself would turn out. Then I remembered that they could go the route of making it a joke episode, and the only season finale to do that was an episode I refused to acknowledge the existence of. At that moment, intrigue became worry, and for the rest of the waiting period, I was internally saying, "Oh my god, please be good, please be good, please be good!" And when it came out, you could guess by its placement on the list that it was more than just good. It was amazing. Yeah, I'm so happy with how Saitama vs. Popeye came out. As of right now, it's actually my second favorite finale in the series. The analysis once again has some god-tier editing and some good jokes, with the best one being Boomstick yelling no in response to Wiz saying he's gonna use math. On top of that, I really liked learning about the characters, as well as some facts about spinach. I mean, it's Popeye, so I guess that was expected. But oh my god, did we need that close-up of a man eating a burger? I feel uncomfortable watching that, I'm sorry. But it could be worse. It didn't drag the overall enjoyability of the analysis down significantly, and it sure as hell isn't gonna affect the fight animation. And by the way, it feels like a genuine work of passion. Not only is it the longest fight animation in the season, nearly reaching 5 minutes, but it also has all 3 of the show's main animation styles. Sure, it's hand-drawn mainly with some absolutely stunning backgrounds, by the way, but there's a segment that's done in sprites and one that's done in SFM by Devil Artemis. Since all 3 were animated very well, it makes this also feel like a celebration of animation in general. But how good is the action, though? Very. It basically goes exactly how you'd think a fight between these two would. Without spinach, Popeye basically deals next to no damage to Saitama despite the surrounding damage of the store, which Popeye fixes while muttering to himself, which I hear is perfectly in character for him. After that, Saitama attacks back, and I love Popeye saying he can't read what's on his fist before he explodes into a bloody mess. But he survives because Toon Force and spinach. It is Popeye we're talking about here. And then the backing track kicks in. Balderdash is really good in that department, really giving the action that much more intensity. As a solo track, I wouldn't say it's anywhere near as good, but I still found it to be a nice listen nonetheless. Back to the action though, some good attention to detail is now that Popeye has spinach in his system, not only do we see Saitama getting more serious, but also when he punches Popeye, he not only survives, but gets to return the favor, and why not change the animation style while we're at it? Both the main sprites and the top-down sprites are really good, and I found the whole bit interesting in general, with Saitama running backwards and using his only ranged option, and Popeye rowing the boat really fast to catch up to him. I also love that they were able to work in Popeye's iconic "I am what I am" line as he punches Saitama with a giant-sized arm and changes the style back to hand-drawn. Oh yeah, did I mention the voice acting is fantastic? I don't think I have actually, but anyway. Ryan Abedi sounded pretty spot on for Saitama, as did Liam Swan for Popeye. The latter was something I found really cool because knowing his usual roles for working on the show, researching, writing, and as of this season, directing, I never really expected him to take up voice acting too, let alone be really good at it, so it was a really nice surprise. Going back to the action once more, the giant-sized punch has Popeye in the air, being more concerned about how he's gonna get back down rather than his opponent, who ended up underwater. And he throws an entire chunk of the planet into the air alongside a good chunk of the ocean. Saitama then hits Popeye into the landmass, which explodes and blows up part of the planet. Oops. But yeah, then we get to the 3D segment. Oh, Jesus Christ, is that Popeye or is that my sleep paralysis demon? That aside, what follows is pretty cool, but it's a bit hard to follow exactly what's going on up until they start punching each other rapid fire. Then Popeye sends Saitama to the moon, which blows up and it feels super impactful. After that, we get this really cool bit where we see the death punch followed up by a spinach punch. Holy fuck, that is amazing. As is Saitama realizing that he might have finally found a worthy opponent, which is conveyed by his excitement that is clear as day. And that there's clearly fear on his face before the style switches back to hand-drawn one final time. I love how the transition's done, by the way. We get to see a line drawn, which is revealed to be Pluto when Saitama lands on it. And that's where he takes a moment to process what happened in this fight. He didn't stomp Popeye like he did everyone else he's ever fought. He was unable to, and he's happy about it. He's finally found someone who he thought was on equal footing with him, if not stronger. It's the kind of fight he's always wanted, but could never get in his universe. Then the final clash happens, where both characters turn into outlines over a white background to reference the source materials they originated from, which happens to be comics, be it normal or web. As for what actually happens, Saitama starts to physically break apart, revealing that he is the one who ends up losing. We then see Popeye landing back on Earth, where it starts raining eggs. I like how it's implied that Saitama got turned into eggs because of the okay face on the one Popeye catches. Yeah, if it isn't obvious already, the ending is my favorite part of the fight, and it really cements this episode as a fantastic way to cap off the season. I can see why this is number one for a lot of people, and it could have been that way for me as well. But there just so happens to be two episodes I found myself more connected to. It's not every day where we see a season's penultimate episode get this high, and what better time to talk about one than at the penultimate segment of the video, and what better episode to talk about than the one featuring the penultimate villains of Naruto and Bleach. Talk about a huge coincidence. Probably not the penultimate one of this video, though. Though that sort of thing happening was always on the table, because oh man, Madara vs. Aizen was nothing short of phenomenal. The analysis was really entertaining for one. The editing is amazing, especially with how they used the zoom in on the Mangekyo Sharingan eye as a transition. On top of that, all the jokes landed, whether it was something unexpected like Boomstick referencing Big Chungus, or just being funny in general like Boomstick praising the chair holding Aizen in captivity like it's the most powerful thing in Bleach. Not even the strongest characters in that universe can stand up to the power of the almighty Chair-sama, I swear. Easily the best joke, though, is Wiz talking about Madara's super convoluted plan. Everything about it makes it my new favorite cutaway gag in the series, and on top of that, it might actually be my second favorite joke in the series, meaning it surpassed Boomstick's theory on Blastoise's origin, which if you recall from my Season 2 video, was the previous holder of that spot. Then again, quite a bit has changed since I made that video, but I'm getting off topic here. So the analysis was fantastic, but the episode wouldn't have gotten this high if it weren't for that absolutely spectacular animation. Yeah, there's some things wrong with it, like Aizen skipping straight to his fourth fusion transformation here when I'm pretty sure he's incapable of doing so, as well as the dragons showing up looking a bit choppy, but aside from those and some nitpicks, everything else is amazing! The action is so sick here. It may start kinda tame with a few clashes and Madara summoning wood pillars, but then we get the Susanoo punch, and everything escalates from there. We get Madara getting dismembered, except not really because it was all an illusion that Madara breaks out of. That's when we get Aizen's transformation, which, ignoring the fact that speedrunning is now one of the Hogyoku's abilities apparently, him unleashing that slash is what made me realize I was gonna love this fight. That, and also Madara using the Susanoo to absorb the Black Coffin to turn himself into the Ten Tails Jinchuriki. and summon a goddamn meteor with that fantastic sound effect that made me feel the impact of just how powerful it is. Not to mention Aizen slashing it in two later, as well as the reveal that there's more meteors to follow. Holy shit, this is a crazy fight so far, but we're not done escalating. Aizen cuts another meteor in half, which is followed up by a really cool establishing shot of his final fusion, and then we get the perfect Susanoo coming out. I still think the normal Susanoo looks great in Sasuke vs. Hiei, but somehow they made this look even better. Could be that, or it was just a more intense fight scene in general, or both. And somehow, it's nothing compared to when Aizen summons his 5 energy dragons and Madara fights them with his Limbo clones. See what I mean with the escalation? The fight just keeps getting better and better. I love it just as much as Madara claims to love fighting. And speaking of, it's such a good character moment, not just for Madara, but for Aizen as well, with both of them laughing maniacally with how much they're enjoying their battle. That close-up says it all. And this leads me to the voice acting. Madara is yet another example of how good Nicholas Andrew Louis' range is, since he sounded spot on for the role. And I'd say the same thing about Philip Sacramento's performance as Aizen. On top of that, the deliveries from both felt natural coming out of their characters, with Madara sounding pretty confident in his abilities at times, but for the most part, giving off the vibes of the battle-happy maniac he is. And Aizen having a generally condescending tone when he banters with Madara, while also sounding genuinely menacing. Both of these are showcased well in the death. While both characters are laughing maniacally, they collide for an attack which causes an explosion. Madara is left limbless, but Aizen appears to have died. Madara takes a moment to compliment his seemingly deceased adversary, but surprise! It was all an illusion. Side note, Aizen impaling Madara here is meant to be a reference to when the character Black Zetsu does the same thing, so that was a cool reference. We then get Aizen telling Madara to know his place, quote-unquote, before obliterating him. Looks like Aizen won here, but surprise again! Another illusion! Fun fact, during the maniacal laughter close-up, you can actually hear the Sharingan sound effect, giving us the indicator that Aizen is likely trapped in an illusion, so it's not like this double fake-out came out of left field. In fact, I liked that they did a double fake-out at the end, since it made sense to do it with these characters knowing how they're both known for casting illusions. As for what follows, Madara rips Aizen apart with the truth-seeking orbs, which was really cool, but I wish we got a visual of the Hogyoku breaking to really sell that Aizen died here, because as it is, I was expecting another fake-out before the screen cut to black. Even besides that, I still really like the killing blow, as well as Madara standing there with the bloodied staff, watching all the meteors fall and cause destruction to the wasteland they were fighting in. It was so damn cool. And you know what everything is helped by? What made me appreciate the animation here even more? The fight track. Hollow Dreams is my new favorite original track in the series. I didn't expect Mighty to be topped, but damn did Brendan Yates find a way. The lyrics are so fitting for these characters, and I love how it's all about illusions. On top of that, the melody and the composition, just everything is so good! Gah! Plus, it references a previous original track, that being Dangerous Gaze, and knowing how much I love that track and hearing that part of it is here, it's so good, and I'm happy the episode it's composed for is just as fantastic. But like I said earlier, there's only one episode that could be at the top, and for me, there was only one true answer. While Season 8 wasn't as good as Season 6, it was still a fantastic season. Hell, I think I enjoyed it more than Season 5 overall. Though I'll say this about the first half, while we did get Yoda vs. King Mickey and Link vs. Cloud 2021, I wouldn't say either one were among my all-time favorites. Everything else was enjoyable, with the exception of Steven vs. Star anyway, but nothing really clicked with me as well as past episodes have, leaving me unsure if this was really worthy of being the Legacy season. Then the second half came around, where half the episodes were among my all-time favorites, but they were surrounded by episodes I didn't exactly care for all too much, with Korra vs. Storm being the only real in-between. Still, the high points were among the highest in the show, and it made it clear to me that this season was worthy of celebrating the show's 10-year anniversary. And what I have at number 1 here might actually be my new favorite Sprite episode in the series, as well as my new 5th favorite episode overall. Despite how amazing it was, I wasn't exactly sure if it was really worth that title when it first came out, hence I gave it to Beerus vs. Galaxia in my Season 7 video. But over time, I came to appreciate this episode more and more, and even despite it having a few flaws I can't exactly pass off as real nitpicks, the positives outweigh them to the point where it felt even more perfect. And it started resonating with me more than Beerus vs. Galaxia ever could, and quite honestly, it's why I can't think of any other episode to call the best episode of Season 8 than this one. Okay, I know me getting excited about the top entry is cliche at this point, but gah! Dio vs. Alucard is just everything I wanted it to be, and so much more. An amazing analysis, an amazing fight animation, a post-analysis that covers every base they had to and does it fantastically. It might actually be the best post-analysis they've ever done. It not only covers stats, but also their abilities, and even the theoretical instance of Alucard getting Schrödinger and why it wouldn't work. But the post-analysis is just the icing on the cake, though. There's more to why this episode is amazing. The rundowns on both characters are so in-depth this time around, and it's really entertaining too thanks to how good the editing is, as well as the jokes. Boomstick getting a stand and turning Wiz into beer and then drinking him was unexpected and weird, but I love it so much. Also, there's just something I found funny about the way Boomstick pretends to be shocked by Alucard backwards being Dracula, but all of that is nothing compared to the fight animation. Oh my god. The fight animation. To start off, the voice acting is fantastic. Tom Schock did such a good job as Dio, you probably find it hard to believe that he was also the Kool-Aid Man in the previous episode. Always love it when a voice actor shows they have range. And did I mention his screams of pain sounded genuine? As for Alucard, he was voiced by Takahata 101, who has previously voiced him in Team 4 Star's Hellsing Abridged series, and I gotta say, he not only sounded spot on for Crispin Freeman, but also sold the personality of actual series Alucard really well, even with the reference to the abridged series. Though let's be honest, a real fucking vampire is probably the only abridged quote that would make sense for Alucard to actually say. But I wouldn't be this excited about this fight if it weren't for the action. Like Madara vs. Aizen, it starts off normal, but gets batshit crazy later on. Though the whole time, there's a chilling atmosphere that I absolutely adore. Even at the beginning it's there, made evident by Dio's dialogue and Alucard getting ripped in half and recovering from it like it never happened. Plus, there's also Dio's time stops, which, fun fact, did you know that Dio starts throwing knives after his first time stop, which happens when he's in front of a knife store? Attention to detail is awesome, but let's get back to the actual fight. Dio thinks he's won just because Alucard got stabbed by a bunch of knives, even doing his iconic "you thought blank but it was I, Dio" line. But little does he know, the fight's far from over. He realizes this before he finishes his sentence. Alucard releases his level 1 restriction, allowing Baskerville to come out and do some damage to Dio, but then he comes back with the Road Roller. I remember getting really excited to see this because a Dio fight would feel incomplete without a Road Roller, even if I'm not big on JoJo. But Alucard can still come back from that as he releases his level 0 restriction, pushing Dio back with a huge amount of blood, and now he has to deal with zombies. I do wish they were more red since they're supposed to be a blood army and they'd mesh better with the blood in some shots, but they were still able to make it look awesome. And you know what? I'm actually glad they put Level 0's activation as early on as they did because of how intense the fight got afterwards. It's where Alucard starts using his crazier abilities, like his telekinesis, and apparently making 4 giant shadow arms to pursue Dio at a faster rate, and goddamn, that looks menacing as all hell. But don't forget, the Blood Army is still in hot pursuit as well, and holy hell this shot and the sound design is so good here! And the part where they fight with the clock hands? Just, you can tell this was Swan's passion project. This was actually his most wanted matchup, fun fact. Alucard's not the only one using his out there abilities though. Dio's gotten to use his freezing ability and I-beams, both of which haven't been seen since part 1 of JoJo, so I can imagine it's nice to see them used here. And I love the use of the time stop here. The scene itself is pretty choppy, but the delivery and the overall intensity more than makes up for it. Going off topic for a little bit, can I just say how much I really appreciate Hell Over Heaven as a backing track? It's just amazing sounding in general. It's a metal piece that is upbeat for the most part, but has some elements of horror too because of the sinister sounding violins, clock-ticking sound effects, a freaking choir at parts, and some heartbeats giving this an overall chilling vibe. Genuinely a top-tier track, and my second favorite from the season. Plus, it's a noteworthy part of why the ending of this fight is so amazing, with it playing Jotaro's theme during Dio's final rushdown on Alucard, where the world crushes his heart and punches him over and over again, with Dio doing the iconic Muda Muda Muda, and eventually, Al is punched into nothing but blood, with the ending shot of Dio's Re, and it just raining his blood. Second favorite death this season. Though remember when I said there's flaws in this animation? Yeah, I'm not sure I'm really feeling the conveyance of the Blood Army being destroyed with the way the explosions look, and the weak sound design. Plus, the clock tower seems to have suffered no noticeable damage outside of the clock hand being gone. But that's really it for flaws. And considering everything surrounding them being really awesome, like I love Dio egging Alucard to finish the fight, getting him to recite the first part of the Bird of Hermes poem, leading to a clash that doesn't actually happen because Dio time-stopped his way out of it, the flaws don't matter to me in the grand scheme of things. God, this episode, it's so amazing, man. This segment, nay, this video's gone on long enough, so I'll just say this. For the reasons I stated earlier, it's the only episode this season that I can see myself calling the best episode of Season 8. This video took a lot out of me, holy crap. In fact, I think I'm losing steam for lists like these, so if I continue to make videos, Death Battle related or not, I cannot promise a consistent upload schedule at all. That said, I'm happy I was able to make this video since you guys seem to enjoy my content, and I'm grateful for that, as well as you all being so patient with me. As for lists on future seasons, I will be doing those. Season 9 and beyond will be getting a list like this. Speaking of Season 9, I can try to get the list for that out at the same time as this, but next year, or January if we're lucky. But there's really no guarantee, and it's too early for me to make promises for that time frame anyway. As for right now, leave a like if you enjoyed this video, subscribe, all that good stuff. Until then,